Everybody, thank you for joining me for today's webinar. We're going to be talking about 10 tips for making your PowerPoint slides effective, and I'm Dr. Nufer. Now, I say 10 tips for making your slides. This could really be 100 tips, or even more. There are a lot of different strategies that we can use, and I just chose 10 that I thought would be useful for us. And so we'll just get right into it. I'm using PowerPoint for this presentation, by the way, so you can feel free to judge me as I'm talking about how to do effective slides. If you don't think the slide is good, then feel free to send criticism and judgment my way because I deserve it, right? So I'm going to just plow through this, and first thing we have is keep things short and to the point. This is a big faux pas for a lot of people doing PowerPoint presentations. Really, the PowerPoint platform is meant to be a tool for presentations, and really it should be a supplement and not a crutch. So it's important to keep your talking points streamlined and efficient. So excessive narrative really belongs in a PDF report format and not in a slide deck. So you don't want to write paragraphs on your slides. And even if you use bullet points, you want to make sure that they're as short as possible and to the point. So in this slide, I have some imagery, maybe it's relevant to whatever I'm talking about, and a couple of points down here. If you're really making a lot of points, that should go on several slides and not all in the same slide. I know it's a temptation. In fact, I'll talk about that. So it might be a temptation, like I have here, talking about the psychology of color. I'll be tempted to just put as much information as possible on the content page here on the slide. And that's human nature. We want to be efficient. We're cognitive misers, and we want everything to be as efficient as possible. And so if there's space, we feel like we need to fill it. If there's information that's relevant, we feel like that should be on the slide because it would benefit people. But in reality, it can be overwhelming. And so in this case, the information here is quite overwhelming. And so maybe I can pare that down a little bit. So I found another graphic that it's more streamlined. It uses imagery and the colors in a more efficient way, perhaps. It doesn't have as much detail as the last slide. But even so, I'm looking at 7 different colors, and it's just a lot of information to take on all at once. So an alternative, what I might do is instead of having a lot of information on one slide, I'll have a slide that really focuses on one bit of information, and then I can move on to the next one. And by the way, in the background, this is actually just one slide, and I'm using animations to have things come and go, elements come and go. So it's not too cluttered. I could do this. I could have done this interaction on 4 different slides and just transition from one to another. But in this case, I just used animation. So in line with keeping things short and to the point, I wanted to talk about choosing the right fonts and formatting. Again, the theme here is to keep it simple. There are a lot of options for font families out there, and it is really important to pick the right font. You can't say that, oh, any font will do. I'm just going to pick something that's creative or fun or cute, whatever. Font families have purposes, and there are certain fonts that are good and certain fonts that are not great for PowerPoint presentation. The right font is the one that the audience is actually going to read. And that's the key, is that you want them to read the what you have on this slide, and that's important. So I'm talking about the different types of fonts. You have sans serif. Serifs are those little ornamental elements that dangle off the letters. Sans serif is a very good font. It's not ornamented, and it really facilitates readability. And your purpose is that you want your audience to read as much as possible. If you want them to read, if you don't want them to read, use an image and not words. The serif fonts are a little more ornamented, but it can affect readability. It can be a little bit harder to read than a sans serif font, and if it's a little bit harder, that means they might read a little bit less, and that's not great. There are other fonts too, such as decorative fonts. Those tend to be very ornamental and cute, as well as script fonts, which replicate a handwriting or calligraphy mentality. And those can be fun, but you want to use them very sparingly, perhaps never. And if you do use them, maybe only as slide titles and only if they're very legible, because the purpose is not to create a slide deck that's aesthetically interesting. It's to convey information in a way that's effective. And so you don't want to lose people ornamental or decorative script or decorative fonts. So the wrong font can be nearly impossible to read. Some good fonts are, it's kind of hackneyed at this point, but Arial, Verdana, Helvetica, Calibri, they're very safe choices, and they're available on pretty much every computer these days. And so even though they're normal, it's pretty safe to go with those. You want to be generous with your font size as well. These days, PowerPoint presentations might be read on anything from a high definition projector in a ballroom to a small mobile device and everything in between. And so a good rule of thumb is that slide titles should be no less than 20 points and the body should be no less than 18 points. And I say side on generosity, make them even larger. I think this is probably 30. If you can go 24 and 22, just make your slides, make the font as big as possible. And what you don't want to do is start making the font smaller so that you can squeeze more narrative on the slide. If you really need more narrative, then perhaps consider having 2 slides instead of 1. But again, streamlining is great. When we're talking about fonts and formatting, there are different ways that you can format text, and there are right and wrong ways. This is a left justified, and again, in a PowerPoint presentation, I wouldn't want this much narrative on a slide. But since I do have this, and this applies to Word as well, or anything where you have word processing, I have this left aligned so that all of the lefts, is aligned right there, and then it kind of dangles off at the end, depending on how many words there are. What you don't want to do is center, and this can be common, but you really just never want to center because it's not professional and it's really hard to read. The readability studies say that people read slower and they tend to read less if text is centered. You can right align. Left align is preferred. Right align, there are times you have to have a reason to right align, but that's acceptable. Another thing you don't want to do is justify your text, which means it forces it left aligns it, but it also forces it to be right aligned. And the problem is that you might have some lines where the words are stretched. There's a lot of space in between the words in order to make it fit, and it kind of forced into that. And so that's not good because that can affect readability, and it can also create these rivers of space right here. And aesthetically, that's not good, and it kind of throws people off when they're reading. And we don't want that. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to read the content. Third thing here is contrast. Contrast is a designer's best friend, and contrasting is about accentuating the differences. We're conditioned to notice differences, and we really appreciate contrast. Not just in PowerPoint, but also in literature, in cinema, we always find these struggles between contrasting characters, and we find that to be particularly compelling. Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter versus the Dark Lord Voldemort. We might not be conscious about it, but we're always looking and searching for differences in our environment. And so if we can help that into PowerPoint, the contrast in our presentations can give design energy and authority. For this reason, also the background images that we choose are important. Now on this slide here, this is very basic. It's white with black text. If I wanted something dark, this is just off black. It's a shade lighter than black and a shade grayer than white. But the key that I'm pointing out, and I also put this as bold just so that it would kind of jump out on the screen a little bit more. So I bolded it. But we're really looking for that light text on a dark background or dark text on a light background. If you did want to have a background image, something that's a little bit active, then one trick, I copied this, the bar right here, and put it down here on top of the image. And then I set the shape transparency to about 15% or so. So I can see a little bit through to the background, but it's not distracting enough that I can't read the font there. But in general, you do want to avoid noisy images or gradient backgrounds. Gradient would be graphics that morph and blend between dark and light shades. So your background generally should be pretty dark or pretty light, and your font color should complement that. Remember, light on dark and dark on light. So some examples of bad practices now. I have, this is an image. It's an interesting image. I I think it's interesting, but it's not great for this slide. You have dark, you have light, you have shapes, you have depth. You have the podium here in the foreground, and then you have background, and even you have buildings way back there behind the windows, and just a lot is happening. And then I have text on top of it. Even though it's dark text on a light background, the background is so busy and distracting that it's hard to even notice the text really. You want to look at all the chairs and desks and such. This example right here is a little bit better. We got gradient. We got from dark to medium dark background, but there's just not enough contrast between the words here. So I would want to make that maybe a white or off-white, something like that, to make it really pop. But generally, this wouldn't be a bad background. We just have to be mindful of the foreground. Now, if I did want to use that imagery again, you can consider placing text off of the image. And in this case, this is probably a somewhat close to a 40-60 split or 50-50 split. And so feel free to split the page, have some imagery. You can also split it left and right if you want. But in this way, my title, my slide title here is not competing with the image. It's more supplementing it because it's not interposed on top of it. Another way to do that, if you want to get a little artsy, then you can create something like this. The same image, I cropped it a little bit differently, and then I put the content to the right. So they're not necessarily competing. They're a little bit competing aesthetically, but it's not hard to read the font because of the background. So my next point, number 4, is if you have data, then go ahead and show it. And it might be tempted to just have narrative, but in reality, I have an interesting example here. Legos, because I have small kids and there's Legos everywhere. If you have data, it's kind of like the stack of Legos. Go ahead and sort the data and arrange the data into piles and then present it visually. Visually presented data can be so much more impactful than just narrative or raw data. And that's because we're visual communicators. We, as people, are Neanderthal ancestors communicated visually. They had cave paintings and they recorded their events and preserved their genealogy, told stories. They documented history through the images on the caves. And today, we don't necessarily do PowerPoint via cave, but we still have an appreciation for visual communication. And so it can be very efficient and compelling to communicate that way. PowerPoint has a lot of graphic and design options that we can choose from. There are also a lot of infographic platforms out on the internet. There's Visme and Canva and PictoChart, and you can just type in Google infographic. And there's a lot of stuff that can walk you through it. I have an example here though. Okay, so suppose this is my data. I want to say 9 out of 10 people don't really like PowerPoint presentations. It's not hard to understand that. So, I mean, that's just one point. But imagine if this was 5 bullet points or something a little more complex. I could write it out like that and probably people understand it. But I wonder if there's a visual way that I can show 9 out of 10 people not really liking PowerPoint presentations. And this might not be a compelling example, but here's what I thought of. I have a picture here and I counted there's about 30 people in this picture. So I can say, these people are all looking at a PowerPoint presentation. And here are all the people who aren't really benefiting or appreciating the PowerPoint. They're not really learning much. And these are all the people who are positively responding to the PowerPoint presentation. So that's kind of a visual. This is a little bit cluttered. I admit that. Another way I can do that. So here are all the people. These are the people who are actually benefiting from the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, that might be a little more compelling, showing the difference between the audience, the total audience, and the people who are benefiting. So I'm going to pause here, just take a quick question. If you're going to get a link to the presentation, in case people have come in late, yeah, it'll be on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/TCSEdTech. And you should have had a link to that channel in the webinar when it was announced via email, or else just email me and I'll send you the link again. All right, so we're almost halfway through the presentation. Talking about transitions. Transitions are those jumps between slides, the animated effects that take place. Microsoft gives you all kinds of transitions. So does Keynote if you have a Mac. Excuse me. There are certain transitions that are good and certain transitions that are really awful. So I'm going to tell you the ones that I approve of. Transitions, you can have none, or you can have fade, push, and wipe. Now, push and wipe, I would say only use those if it's going left or right. Don't bother with up and down. Those four are the most professional transitions. Don't feel like you have to have a transition, and definitely don't use the other ones unless you're trying to be funny or annoying, I guess. But none, fade, push, and wipe. In other words, all of these don't bother with those, please. You might have a transition called morph, and for some reason on our 365 account, we don't have access to morph. I'm going to reach out to help desk and see if we can get that again. That could be another webinar just talking, maybe a micro webinar just talking about how to use the morph transition when we have access to that. But fade is just fine and none is just fine. Those are my two favorite and most often used. And just if you're one of my students and you submit a presentation with any of these, then I'm probably going to call you into my office hours and have a discussion about the life choices that you've made to get up to that point, because there's really just no place for those. Number 6 would be to use imagery. Now I'll just read the text up here. This is bad practice for PowerPoint, but use professional images. Only use high resolution images, which means essentially that they're very big. Large images can be made smaller, but if you have a small image, you can't make it larger. That just doesn't work. It gets distorted, it looks bad, and I actually used that for one of my slides earlier. If I jump to that, this one here, this image was small, and I forced it to be large, and you can see it's a little bit blurry and not something that I'm particularly proud of. So I'm going to actually jump out of this presentation for a moment, and you should have access to this presentation, by the way. If you look in the handouts tab, you should have a handouts tab and go to webinar, and you can download this presentation that I'm showing you. So I thought that I had closed out of my email. Let me close out real quick. Let me bump these down. Now this is the slide. I actually have an image off to the side here that I want to work on. So suppose I want to add this image, and it's just a free image that I found on an image website with high definition, high resolution images. And I'm going to put this in here. So what you don't want to do is say, all right, I want it to be about this wide and maybe this tall. And okay, does that look good? No, that looks awful because I changed the dimensions of the image. I forced it to be too tall and not wide enough. And you can see how it looks pretty odd. These people wouldn't appreciate me doing that to them. So let me back out of that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I grab the corners. And when I grab the corners, I can reshape it in a way that it keeps the resolution, the height. You know, if it's one tall and two wide, it'll keep that one tall and two wide. All right, so suppose I want to put the image right here. I'm going to double click on it. And instead of trying to make this, force it to be narrow, I'm just going to crop it. Cropping is a lot better than forcing the dimensions. So I'll click out of that. Now I did crop her off, so I'm just going to drag in the middle of here and drag it somewhere like that and click off, and there's my image. And if I wanted to, I could put a drop shadow around it and come back, and there's my image. And it looks good. They don't look skinny or fat or whatever. It's the right dimensions. And so if you need to force it into a space, do it by cropping, and don't do it by trying to change the width without changing the height. Pause just 1 second and put the link to the YouTube video in the chat window, just so you have that. So youtube.com/tcsedtech. Use imagery. Images are a great way to supplement your data. They can be very interesting. And the good thing, if you're presenting live and you have an image, it gives people something to look at. Like this would be something that would give them something to look at so that they're not distracted, but they can still listen to me. They can listen to my words. They can multitask in that sense, that they can hear what I'm saying while their eyes are being engaged by something that doesn't take a lot of cognitive load to process. And so that can be effective. If it's an image that's very busy and has a lot of stuff going on, then they might spend more time looking and interpreting the image than actually listening to you. So you have to kind of balance between that. The next one, number 7, is color schemes. Color schemes are really fun. They can add flair and flash to your presentation, and it can bring ordinary content to life. Now, you might be tethered to a certain departmental or institutional template, so you might not have freedom to really explore the color schemes. But if you do have that freedom, then using color schemes can engage the audience and make it really interesting. Now I'm going to back out of this again. One thing you can do is you can go into the design tab in PowerPoint and you can pull down different templates, but you can also have these color schemes right here. Microsoft has several, and these are not bad. I can tell you, Microsoft does a lot of things awful, like transitions and animations, but these are not too bad. Or you can customize it, and you can customize a lot of different aspects. What does a hyperlink look like? What are the main colors, the accent colors? What do the dark and white look like? So you can customize those. You can also go on the internet. So I minimize that to, let me see, color.adobe.com, and I'll put that right in the chat as well. That might not have come. Let me try that again in the chat with the HTTP. There's the link. Color.adobe.com is interesting. It'll give you a lot of different, color swatches, combinations. You can go in and edit those if you want. One interesting thing is here's this picture that I used on that last slide. If I go ahead and copy that image address, or if you have a picture on your computer that you want to use, then you can actually import the image. Oh, it looks like it's in my cache, that's why. Okay, so I'll go ahead and select that photo that I was using, and it'll take that photo and it'll look at different parts of the photo and create a color swatch for you. Now I can change that around. Colorful, I can make it bright or muted, something deep. There's not a whole lot of variety in this particular image. And then I can go ahead and grab this around, and if I want it more of a green, this orange here, maybe I want to make that more of a, I don't know, kind of a brownish. Then you can drag those around, and it gives you a color swatch, and you can save the color theme. You can sign up for an account for Adobe for free. If you want, you can publish it, you can save it to your library, and then you can use those color schemes and you can put them into PowerPoint if you want, and that could be your color theme for PowerPoint. So let me get back to this presentation. I chose this slide to be dark just to accentuate. These are possible color schemes, and so they can be pretty interesting. Again, add flair, and look for complementary colors. Here's something else. I'm going to, again, oops, I don't need that image here. I'm going to back out of the presentation and hop to the behind the scenes of the PowerPoint. This is a trick for aligning objects. This is less for presentation and more for preparation as you're preparing things. So I have several boxes here, and I'm going to show you how to align them. If you select one and hold the Control button as you click on other elements, it selects all of those elements. And I'm going to go ahead to the Format ribbon on the ribbon here and go to Align. I have some options. I can pull all of these together. So that right now they're random and I want to make them orderly. I can align these all to the top. So it will take the topmost resource that I have highlighted and it'll put everything else so that their tops are aligned with this top. For example, like that. I can also do that with the bottom. So it would search out that bottom one and align by the bottom or the middle. And let me tinker around a little bit more. Another way I can select those is left click anywhere on a PC. I'm sorry for Apple people, but you can start drawing this box and it'll select everything that falls within that box. Now you have to select them completely. Notice if I half select this last one on the right, it doesn't quite get there. But it'll catch everything that's within in that box there. So I'm going to align these. I'll align them middle, and then I can distribute them horizontally, which will take the far left and the far right. It'll keep those as anchors, and everything in between, it'll distribute equally. And so right there, now I have 4 boxes that are exactly the same, and you can tell that they're exactly the same because as I move these around, you can see the motion lines there. I know that it's the exact distance between each element, and the top and the bottom are aligning. Sometimes the top and the bottom won't both align. That's only if it's the exact same shape. If this was slightly longer, then I could align the top or the middle or the bottom right there. So let's back out and do this again. Now I'm going to align them. You can align them left or center, which would be center in the page, or right. So I'm going to align these left. So it looks like I have 3, but let me spread those out again. Let me drag this guy a little bit down here. And now I'm going to distribute those vertically. So there's 4 items. It'll take the top, the bottom, keep those as anchors, and everything else it'll distribute in the center like that. Now, if I wanted to copy shapes really quickly and easily, if I hold Control down on my PC keyboard or Mac equivalent, as I move it, it actually makes a copy. So I can make lots of copies here. And then I can go ahead and, let's say I want these on this side of the page now. I'm going to grab all of those. I'm going to right align those, and I will distribute those vertically. And so it's a quick and easy way to make those changes. Now, if I'm holding Control down as I move this, it makes a copy. If I hold Shift and Control at the same time, it forces it to stay in line. And you can see it's exactly in line. Now I can also, if I have 2 of them selected, I can highlight, I can get 2 at the same time. So that's just a way, to align center, left, vertical, distribute evenly. Just kind of a tip for PowerPoint. The next thing I want to show you about is PowerPoint presentations versus PowerPoint shows. And I'll go ahead and stay, I'll go ahead and stay in this view. Now, PowerPoint presentation, everybody's familiar with PowerPoint presentations. For example, it's you have PowerPoint, you open it up, and it takes you to this window here where you have ribbons, you have thumbnails, you have your slides, perhaps you have some notes at the bottom here. And by default, whenever you save a presentation, it saves it as a PowerPoint presentation, but you can also save it as a show. And I'm going to show you how to do that. When you click on Save As, go to wherever you're going to save it. Instead of saving as a default PowerPoint presentation, I can scroll down here and save it as a PowerPoint show, which is different. So go ahead and save that. I'll pull up my Explorer here. Now I have a show and a presentation. When I click on, let's see, this is the presentation, and let me hover over here. So this should be the show. If I double click on this, it takes me right to the slideshow, and I can navigate through my slides. As opposed to, let me get out of PowerPoint. So if I click on presentation, and I'm going to rename this real quick. If you press F2 when you're in Explorer, you can quickly rename it. So presentation opens it up, and it opens up my ribbons, my thumbnails, my notes, my slide, and everything. PowerPoint show, when I click on that, it takes me right to the presentation. So this is effective if you're giving a conference presentation and you don't want people to see the behind the scenes and you just want to open it up and take it right to the front page. Then you can just rock and roll. And that can also be effective if you want to email it to a student or something, and you don't necessarily want them to see your notes and all this, and you know that they're going to just click on the show anyway, then that can be an effective way. So that's the difference between a PowerPoint presentation and a PowerPoint show. Last thing I'll show you is the presenter view. Presenter view is something, and hopefully everybody knows about the presenter view. If you have two monitors, then you can use presenter view. If you only have one screen that you're working with, then it won't work. But if you're in a classroom setting, then you'll have your laptop as one screen and the projector as another screen. So you can present the slides on the projector, and on your laptop, you can see the presenter view. And hopefully everybody knows about this. If not, then definitely pay attention. On the slideshow ribbon in PowerPoint, you have a box called Use Presenter View. It's like as I hover over it, it says Presenter View shows the full screen slideshow on one monitor and a speaker view on the other. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So I have Presenter View selected. I have my monitor. You have a primary monitor, a secondary monitor. So I'm showing the slides on my secondary monitor. And when I click on the PowerPoint show, here's what the audience sees. And I'm going to drag over from my other monitor what the presenter view sees. So at the podium, this is what you would be seeing on your laptop, where the students would be seeing, or the audience, if you're at a conference presentation, they would be seeing your regular slides. So there's a lot of useful things here. You have a timer, which since I've been exiting and entering, presenter view, it starts over every time. I can pause the timer, reset that. I can see what slide I'm on, and then I can also see the slide that's coming up. And when I click on the slide coming up, then it takes me to that slide. I can see my notes. For example, I can make the notes bigger or smaller. I can see an overview of all my slides, which is when I was over on the imagery slide and I went back to the font family slide. That's how I did it. Is on the presenter view on my other monitor, I clicked on see all slides, and then I clicked right on this one. And then when I went back, I clicked on the slide that I was on. And that's better than scrolling all the way back and saying, okay, let's see here. Okay, oops, now I have to go forward. Okay, this slide. Now you can know exactly what slide you want to be on. It's like right now I'm on presenter slides. And yeah, I have notes that I'm not really reading from at this moment. You can also make your slide black if you want to just hide everything so you can see in the background. It's all hidden. You can also make that white, but you have to click a couple buttons and make it white. And that's a way that you can say, okay, audience, forget what's up there. Just everybody listen to me right now. And because what I'm saying is very important. You can highlight certain parts. So if I click on that magnifying glass, then I can and that's something you can do outside of presenter view as well. If I click on here in the lower left-hand corner, I have the magnifying glass, and so I can zoom in right there. Click again. No. Click escape. And also on the main slide view, I can do this, but I prefer to do it on the presenter view so that people don't see all of my slides. I want to keep it clean. So let's hop back over here. What else do we have? We have a pen, or a laser pointer is it just turns your cursor into something that looks like a laser on there. I have a pen that I can mark things up. So I could say, here's the slide view, and then click on this. I can erase all of that. I erase everything, or I can have an eraser and erase certain parts. I can highlight certain things, and X kind of like a highlighter. Now I'm on presenter view behind the scenes, but it's happening on the regular screen as well. I'm going to erase all of that. I can change the color of the ink to basic colors there. I can hide the mouse cursor as well. Other options up here, I can hide presenter view, end the show. I can shift through the slides forward and backward in this way. And also, if you have animations on the slide, then you can tell what animation is coming up next. So let me go back to another slide that was maybe a little more interesting with animations. How about this one here? Okay, so this is my slide. This is slide 7. And I'm going to minimize this a little bit. I'm going to take off the highlighter. Okay, so this was a blank screen, and I know that there's an animation coming up, which is this thing's going to appear. It's going to fade in, and then I click on it again. Another thing's going to fade in, and so I can see my animations before they happen. Another animation would be here on this presenter view. As I'm talking about presenter view, I know that there's an arrow that's going to come up right there. And then there will be another arrow down there. And I can see that my next slide is going to be if you have any questions, which means we're coming to the end of our time together. Let's see, display settings, I can swap. Here, I'm going to put my presentation on the other screen. So now the slides are on my left monitor. What you're seeing right now is my right monitor. So you can swap or you can duplicate the slideshow, which just takes it off of the slide, the preview mode. If I show the taskbar, that would be on your primary monitor. I'm going to here swap these again. And with that, I will close it out and see if anybody has questions or comments. Anything that you think I missed that really should have made this top 10 list and you lose respect for me because I didn't include it, or any questions that you have about things that I rushed over and you'd like a refresher. One question that we have is, will we get the recording to this presentation? Yes, it'll be on the YouTube channel, which I have in the comment box. I'll go ahead and recopy that for anybody who came after. Let me see. Paste. For some reason, it's pasting all weird. Let me try and format that. Okay, there you go. YouTube.com or youtube.com/TCSEdTech. And I'll mention that I'm actually right now at the Online Learning Consortium conference, and I'll be presenting there tomorrow. So I'm a little bit busy. We have a team dinner tonight. I'll try and get that up as quickly as I can. See if I need to edit a few little things out. But you can watch for that soon. I'll get it up as soon as I can. Any other questions? Looks like a few people found this information useful. If you wanted to, I can unmute you as well. It's like John McAfee. You have your hand up. If you want, I can unmute you if you want to talk to me. One question is, what is the appropriate amount of animation per page? 2. How about that? Is that a good? No. It really depends. Let me back out of the presentation view. On this page here, I had dozens of animation, probably 3 dozen animation effects, because each one of these little X's appeared, and I had them take about 0.1 second to animate to fade in, and I had each animation coming in right after the previous animation. So we look at what that looked like. It takes a little bit of time, but technically that's a lot of animations. What you don't want are animated GIFs. Really, I'm trying to think if I have an example of an animated GIF. New computer, so I don't have my folders, but here, to be safe, let me look at pictures of kittens, and I'm going to say file type GIF because those can be animated. I'm trying to think. Okay, so go ahead and save that. And let's pull up. Let's grab a new slide. Let's see, where's that kitten? All right, what you don't want to do is take an image and make it bigger because you lose a lot of data that way. Oh, why isn't animating? That should be animated. Crumb. Well, I don't want to do that again, but there are certain animations. We used to have clip art. I don't think we have clip art anymore, which is just fine because clip art is awful. But if you have something animated, it should really be purposeful, or else don't have it. Now these things are animated. I have these animated to fade in on mouse click, and just like I talked about transition, how there are a lot of awful transitions. Basically, all of them are awful except for fade, push, and wipe, and morph if we get that. Animation is the same way. You have entrance animations, you have emphasis, which something happens on the screen, and then you have exit, something's leaving the screen, and as well as motion paths. And you have even more than what's on here. If you click on these, then you have access to a few more. But really, the animations I use, I have them fade in, I have them fade out, and I use transparency or maybe desaturate, darken sometimes, but mostly I never use animation, and I never use these bounce, swivel, zoom, grow, turn, random bars, wheel, shape, split. Those are the most awful things in the world. Those are not professional. Almost everything emphasis, everything that's exit, that's not those very same thing. Fade is really safe. And let me show you how I did some of the fades. So as I click on the selection pane, so you can see, what in the world, why is that so big? I have a selection pane and an animation pane. Oh, because I'm the one that made that so big, huh? I have various images on here, and I'm going to hide some of them. So the first image is I labeled it bad, and then I labeled this image better, and then I named this one best one and best two. And you can see the animations I used. I used about 7 animations on this one. So the first one is that bad would fade in. I start with a blank screen, and on the mouse click, the image that I just called bad fades in. On the next mouse click, better fades in, and at the same time, bad fades out, which I went add animation and fade out when I clicked on it in the selection pane. On the next mouse click, best one fades in, better fades out. And on the last one, best two fades in and best one fades out. And so the trick is you want it to be classy. You don't want it to seem like a bunch of bouncy animations everywhere, things flying in and flying out. That's just kind of silly. So if I preview this page, I have this fade in. It's going to fade out now as this one fades in. And now this will fade out as red fades in, and then red will fade out as blue fades in. So it's all one slide, and it's a little more classy than if I were to have swivel animations or bounce. That's just the most awful thing ever. It's just not professional. And let me preview that. So I'm not going to say that animation is all bad. Just use it. Be mindful that simple is better. A little fade can add some class. I did use wipe in this animation for these arrows. I have them wipe, and I have them wiping in from the left so that it looks like they're kind of being drawn in. So what that looks like is the arrows coming in and that arrow's coming in. And I made them really short, 0.25 seconds on mouse click, because if it's longer than that, it can just be distracting. This animation slowly coming in. My philosophy is just make it short, quick, to the point. It can emphasize or accentuate something, but not detract from the presentation, because my presentation isn't about animations. The irony is that perhaps this presentation is a little bit about animations, but generally if I'm in the classroom, I'm trying to present content and not be flashy and showy with animations. So if you can use them well, use a lot, but be sparing and be very selective about what you use. Let me show you another example of an animation that I used. This morning I went into my daughter's elementary class and had a teach-in. So I taught a bunch of fourth graders about psychology and about sense and senses and all that. And so this is one of the slides I talked about. I asked the kids, is this triangle on the screen an isosceles, or it is an equilateral, or is it both? And the trick is that there is no triangle. And so I used an animation motion path to emphasize what you're seeing are three Pac-Man shapes. There really is no triangle, but our mind sees lines and another line, and there's a gap, and it just fills in the gap. And it's like, oh, you can really see the triangle, but it's really not there. And so to do that motion path, let me see the animation pane. I selected all three of the things, and I have a motion path that's a line. You can choose where it starts and where it stops. And then once they're displaced, I added another animation, which is another line, and just put where it stopped, that's the start point, and then I brought it back. And so what that looks like, if I press Alt, when I Alt or hold Alt on the keyboard and then press the slideshow, I get a mini slideshow up here so I can kind of preview without leaving the screen. So what that looks like is three motion paths, one down here and two that are putting these to the side, and then another motion path bringing them back together. And so it seems seamless. I used some more animations on this one. I have, let me show the selection pane. So I have various pictures. I'm going to hide the two pictures. And this was an example of, I'm putting together a puzzle. You can't quite see all of the pieces, but I'm starting to put it together. Can you tell what the image is? And they say, yeah, it's an ocean. I can see sand. And even though you can't see the whole picture, you can kind of make it out. And then I had an image where more of the puzzle pieces are coming in. So you're more confident in what you see. And then I have another picture that is the complete picture. And so the animations are just fade animations. So I have this, it fades to the other one, and it seems seamless. It doesn't even seem like an animation. It just seems like the picture's changing subtly. So those are examples of animations that you can do. Let me see if there's another example. Okay, here's another example of some animation. This will be the last one. I'm sure you didn't want me to talk for 5-10 minutes on animations, but this was an optical illusion. I asked them to count how many colors are on here, and they have the pink, they see the orange, they see the green, and they see the blue, and then I tell them, really, there's only 3 colors. There aren't 4 colors on here. And so then I have an animation that is going to make that image a lot bigger. So I zoom way in, and then I have a box that appears on the screen, and then the kids could see, oh, indeed, this greenish blue is the same for those, even though it looks like there are green and blue stripes. And so they thought that was kind of interesting as well. And so what I did with that is I have this image here grows to, I'm trying to think, 260% is what I figured was the right amount for this edge to align with the edge of the screen there. And then I had this title disappear at the same time, just so that there wasn't optical illusions on top of that. And then I had the rectangle appear in there. And so this one's a little bit more flashy, I would say, but it's because I was teaching 4th graders and trying to make it interesting. So I'm not going to say never use animations, and I'm not going to say use all the animations that you want. Just be sparing. Make sure it's simple and effective, and that the animations really support the content, and that they're not just something flashy that you're doing for fun, even though I was trying to be flashy with my 4th grade students that I was teaching today. We got some more questions, so let me just hop over to the question pane real quick. How did you do the fading around the photo? And that was about 10 minutes ago. and I can't remember which fading. If you're talking about this photo here, this is actually 2 images, and you can go into PowerPoint or Photoshop. I actually modified this on my phone because my computer is having a problem with Photoshop right now with my driver or whatever. And I made this black and white, except for these characters right here. And then I made it blurry, except for those characters right there. And then I put that image on top of the other one and just made it fade. I just had it fade in. And so that accentuates it in that way. So nothing super sophisticated. I had to use it on my phone. You could do that in PowerPoint, but full disclosure, I was still working on this presentation within an hour before I started, so I was kind of a little bit pressed. But be creative, with the way that you do things, and just explore, and you'll be surprised at what you're able to come up with. All right, Michelle, thank you for wishing me to have fun at OLC. I think I will have as much fun as the conference is. Is it possible to appear image fade in and out using 2 animations on 1 image or text? Yes, it is. And let me just grab a new slide to really show how we would do that. So slide, I'm going to make a circle. Put that right in the middle. To review alignment before, I'm going to put that in the center and make sure it's center and middle. So it nudged it a little bit there. I'm going to go to animations, and by default, if you click on any one of those, it applies that animation. But if you click on a different thing, so that's fade in, if you press fade out, it replaces the previous one with your newest one. So what you'd want to do is make sure you have that image selected and click add animation. If you already have it fade in, then you're going to click add animation and fade out. And then you'll see both of those are there. What would be interesting is to have something fade in and fade out right afterwards. So I'm going to, instead of start on click or start with previous, because that would, I don't know what it would do, nothing. I'm going to start after previous. So let's see what that looks like. Click my button, fades in, fades out automatically. Otherwise, I'd set it for click. Here's my thing, fades in, click again, fades out. And I can add even another one. Let me add this bounce one just to show you how awful it is, because really it is bad. Another trick, if you don't want it to start from the beginning, hold shift when you press F5. So here it fades in, there it fades out, classy all the way. And this is the dumbest thing ever, I'll tell you. That's why I'm telling you, don't do anything that's not fade, and be wary. Wipe sometimes, maybe float in, even I'd be wary of flying and float in. You really have to know what you're doing, but fade and wipe tend to be classy. Let's see, another question. The puzzle pieces are amazing. How did you do this? Well, thank you for one. I don't know if I showed that. Let's see. Oh, where are those puzzle pieces? Right here. I'm going to actually zoom out quite a bit. And what this is actually 3 different images. I started by taking this image of a beach, and then in Photoshop, back when Photoshop was working, I just put a puzzle piece on top of it and started cutting pieces out. And so this is actually 3 different images. I start with this image that has a lot of white space. So I made a puzzle piece on top of the regular image and just selected content that was in these and just deleted them or made them white. And then I placed this one directly on top of that and just put the fade animation, so it fades on top of it. And then I put this one right on top of there. You have to make sure the height and width are exactly the same. And then they fade in. And so it's actually 3 different images, and it just gives it the effect that the image is changing. and I can go back and forth. And so that's how I did that one. Let's see, going back, the fading around the photo of the woman and the man. Sorry, just reading one of the questions. What was that? Was that in here? Sorry, Emerlyn, I still don't quite understand what you're asking, but if you want, I can unmute you. So with this one, I was tinkering around, and then I double clicked and I clicked crop, and then just kind of moved it within the cropped image to something that I want. Double click again. You have a bunch of picture styles as well. You can border it. I can put certain effects like drop shadows, but I like this drop shadow right here, so I just put that in there. But you have a lot of of options. If I wanted, let me take off that drop shadow and play around with maybe a glow or soft edges. Soft edges could be fun. If I click on this, it'll take me to, let me get this bigger. I'll get rid of some of these selection panes here. So here's my soft edges. I can tinker around with that and kind of give it a real soft effect right there. And then it's kind of interesting because it really, talking about gradient early in the presentation, this gradient really blends right into the white background up at the top there, so where you can't even see the border. So that's an interesting effect right there. Were there any questions that you had about that? Let's see, Mariam. That was it. Last call for questions. I know we're getting to the top of the hour now. If you want me to unmute you and chat about something, otherwise feel free to shoot me an email if you have other PowerPoint questions or anything that you want me to go over. And I want to thank everybody for coming out to today's webinar. And I hope it was beneficial for you, and hope to see you in the future.